Welcome back to another episode of Psychocinematic. Today I have another special guest who is an absolute legend in the filmmaking world because he wrote Mad Max The Road Warrior and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, as well as a few other films, but he's also a New York Times bestselling author. His name is Terry Hayes, and he is here to talk about his new book, The Year of the Locust, which I read, and it's super good. So without further ado, here's Terry. Terry, thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm super pumped to get to talk to you because not only are you a legend in the film world, but you also are a New York Times best-selling author. And I loved your book. It was like perfectly right up my alley. And it's probably one of the longest books I've ever listened to, but it didn't feel like that at all. So
I'm
good, super pumped.
That's the most important thing, and it's not the length; it's the boredom. You know, like you, I'm sure we both read books of 100 pages that felt like they were 1,000.
Oh yeah,
we both seen movies that were 89 minutes and felt like you'd been there for a week. So I don't think it's the length of anything. I think it's much more: can you maintain either the audience or the reader's interest? That's the job of a writer, a storyteller in movies, of a director. And if you can't do that for 800 pages, well, you should probably look for something else to do.
I really wish more people believed in that. But maybe it's just I'm not the right audience for those certain ones that do go a little long.
No, not at all. I mean, there's some of the best books ever written were very long. The Lord of the Rings, three books preceded by The Hobbit, that didn't seem to have any problems people getting through it. Very often the problem is the writer. Mark Twain, he read the Mormon Bible, the book of faith, and he was asked afterwards, what did he think of it? He said, it's chloroform in print. There is nothing about it that will keep you awake. But, that's a pretty serious criticism, I feel. You got to avoid that at all costs. Well, same with a movie. It's exactly, it's just storytelling in a different form, but it follows similar rules.
So I think for me to understand you as a writer and the stuff that you have worked on with a little bit more context, hearing a little bit about your background and how you got into all this and like how you came to write the second and third installments of Mad Max, how did you become who you are now?
You and my wife should get together. You really should, because that's one of her great questions. And I can tell you what, it's not usually said with much affection. As a migrant kid, I was born in a little town, a bit bigger than a village in the south of England. And when I was 5, my parents took my brother and myself to Australia because they felt there were more opportunities there. Of course, they didn't know anything about Australia, but that didn't stop them. Australia was a country of 7 million people at the time, and it's in a landmass the same size as America. So you can imagine 7 million people wandering around in the United States. There was a lot of open spaces.
Yeah.
Once we arrived, they were the worst wildfires Sydney had probably ever seen up until then. So for a kid from some, little town in the south of England, this was empty, lonely, frightening. And of course, of the 10 deadliest snakes in the world, I think 8 live in Australia. So, and then there were the sharks. Then there were the saltwater crocodiles. So it was not the most benign place in the world. I took refuge in reading. I just read everything I could find. I loved it. It was total escape. I always think that writers don't choose it in a way. They are chosen. Not to say that they're elite or anything, but life chooses them. So anyway, I'd go to the bookstore, go to the library, go to the Mitchell Library in Sydney, millions of books. And I'd think, how hard can this be? Look at all these books. Somebody wrote them. Can't be that difficult. So I go into journalism, fortunate enough to have some skill at it. I got the opportunity to produce a very high rating current affairs radio program, so I took that job. The doctor walks into the office, introduced by a mutual friend, never met him. He'd read that screenwriters often come out of journalism, and he tells me, yeah, I used to be a doctor, or I still am a doctor, but I made a movie. And I'm thinking to myself, why would anybody do that? A good job like being a doctor? To make a movie in Australia? I mean, the Australian New Wave hadn't really started. I mean, I was privileged to be a part of that, but nobody made movies. He said, oh, do you want to see this movie I've made? It's not finished, but come and have a look at it. I said, yeah, sure. So he drives for miles out through the suburbs where he's sleeping on somebody's couch. And to this day, I don't know whose house this was. No idea. And he's got a Steenbeck, you know, the old method of editing. He's got that set up in the corner. He's got this black and white TV. He shows me this movie on a 17-inch black and white TV with whole sections missing, him filling in the action, couldn't hear half the dialogue. And he says to me at the end, what do you think? I said, oh, that's interesting. What else can you say? I mean, I suppose it was interesting because it was incomprehensible. And that he said, what do you think of the lead actor? I said, oh, yeah, he seems good. He said, oh, yeah, he's going to be a movie star. I said, oh, really? How would I know? I said, oh, really? Yeah. And I said, well, he's certainly very good looking. He said, yeah. He said, his name's Mel Gibson. I said, oh, yeah, okay. That didn't mean anything to anybody. And the movie, of course, was Mad Max 1. The former doctor, or the non-practicing doctor, was George Miller. You know, I think George won a couple of Oscars. I became very interested in the world of movies. He was very interested in the world of journalism. But I think we had one thing in common. We're very intellectually curious. There was nothing that was off the table if you wanted to talk about it or explore it or do any of these things. So I found that very stimulating. I used to work on the radio program. Everybody would break for lunch. I'd scurry off and meet with George, and we started to write this screenplay. And I remember the very worst day, because I thought George knew quite a bit about writing movies, when I realised he didn't know any more than I did. At one stage, when we were quite a way through this so-called script, I said to him, George, I don't want to be difficult, but do I get paid for this? He said, oh, yeah, sure. I said, how much? He said, well, it's $25,000. Now, that was about 20% of what I was earning. So all this stuff about making a lot of money in movies is ridiculous, or was to me then. I said, oh, gee, yeah. He said, that's not so good, huh? I said, well, I don't think I'm going to be able to give up the day job immediately. He said, no. He said, of course, you only get the $25,000 if the movie's made. If it's not made, I said, what do I get then? He said, nothing. I thought, my God, this is the most stupid business I've ever heard. Anyway, we finished the script, and that became Road Warrior, Mad Max 2. And, you know, the rest is history.
In preparation for this podcast, I rewatched the original trilogy, and I hadn't seen them since, I mean, it's probably been 15 years. I noticed a huge difference between the quality of Mad Max 1 to then the Road Warrior. Like, just the story itself made so much more sense, because I felt like in the original Mad Max, there wasn't much explanation other than like oil was scarce. And I'm like, wait, how scarce is it? You know, because like everyone's like running around on vehicles, and the police department's strange to me, and I don't know, all this stuff. But it was a very entertaining movie. But then the Road Warrior, like it just came into its own, and I was like, man, it's got to have some correlation between you coming on to Mad Max 2. And then the third one is great as well. Road Warrior would still be my top out of the three, but yeah, you guys really nailed that hero's story there.
I think with Thunderdome, it was a lot of very, very good ideas in search of a stronger narrative. That's my feeling. You've seen them more recently than me. You know, I got 4 kids. I've got plenty of people at home that tell me I'm an idiot. I don't need to watch old movies and have it confirmed, you know. But I think that Road Warrior had a simplicity to its core narrative that Thunderdome did not achieve. We had to make a Thunderdome very fast. It was difficult. We had more money. We had Tina Turner,
Yeah.
which a great lady, terrific lady, but maybe, different casting might have made a difference with that role. I don't know. The bad guy was played by a person called Angry Anderson, and I'm not sure that was the best choice, but we were working in Australia and choices are limited. These are not excuses, they're just observations across many, many years. I think Road Warrior was a better written film. I was once introduced, I come to know her quite well, but Gillian Armstrong, an Australian film director who achieves quite a significant amount of success both in Australia and in LA. I was introduced to her one day, and George said, "Oh, this is Terry. He's the writer of Max 2, Road Warrior." And she looked at me, she said, "Oh, good. I didn't know it had one." Right, okay, thanks. And that's part of the problem. People think in movies that the writing's all about smart-ass dialogue. It's all about great one-liners. No, writing for movies is way deeper than that. Mm-hmm. It's about trying to tap the zeitgeist. It's about poetry, about doing the maximum amount of meaning with the fewest words possible. It's about your structure. It's about how to take the audience through a series of events and not get them so far ahead of you they're bored witless, or so far behind they're saying, what the hell is going on? Mm-hmm. Chris Nolan treads that line. Boy, that's a dangerous line to tread. But he treads it very, very well. I mean, Oppenheimer is not a strictly narrative film as you would expect a biopic. On the other hand, Napoleon is. And Ridley Scott is a brilliant, brilliant director. Mm-hmm. But they are different approaches to a biopic. And clearly the audience liked the Chris Nolan mix it up, challenge us, make us think about it.
Right.
Don't take us step by step through stuff. I don't know Chris Nolan. I mean, I'm not doing a movie with him at the moment. But I think it was a brilliant piece of work. And it shows that it's not about dialogue. It's about structure. It's about challenges. It's about how you interact with the audience. So, I think that Road Warrior hit a very, very vulnerable nerve in the public worldwide. Thunderdome didn't. But so what? Most movies don't, Most movies, that was good. Now let's go, get some dinner.
It's funny you said that about the witty one-liners in movies, because that was something else that I became very aware of in The Road Warriors, that there was almost no dialogue. And I was curious for you as a writer, do you find it easier or harder to tell a story when there's not a lot of dialogue?
Oh, it's much harder. How much you would love to have somebody walk into a room and say, well, here we go. The man out there is this. The woman is supposed to be his wife, but it's not really his wife. The guy over there is having an affair with the woman, whereas the woman is secretly desiring this other woman. Now, the other woman, well, you get the drift. That would be fantastic. I could write 7 pages on that as we're talking and set the whole plot up, and everybody's heading for the exits. Mm-hmm. They are. Now, we had a particular problem in Australia in that Mad Max 1, they were Australians in the movie, but American International Pictures dubbed it for America because they said, well, nobody wants to hear Australians. They can hear these Americans. Well, the Americans were not one would call some of the greatest actors of all time. So the movie ended up being this sort of strange mid-Pacific thing. We were very conscious that there was going to be some difficulty with the sequel, with Road Warrior. We didn't want to burden ourselves unnecessarily so by having 7 or 10 pages of soliloquies from various people and everybody saying, what's he saying? Mm-hmm. I didn't catch that. So part of the design criteria for the film, well, George and I spoke about this a lot, was to make a silent movie. It wasn't a silent movie, but it was certainly, limited in its dialogue. Well, what you need to do when you're faced with that complication, and I wish more people writing movies would confront that complication. What you need to do is you've got to make everything count. And making everything count, every line count, is not about people making jokes. If you want to hear jokes, go to a comedy club. If you want to hear witticisms, great. Go to a dinner party, because it's the instant response that makes something witty. We all know somebody sat down there and sweated these lines with themselves as a writer, and then the actor, and then the director. There's a great moment in Road Warrior. Bruce Spence is walking along through some sort of small canyon thing or something. Bruce Spence was a gyrocopter pilot, and he's like 6'8" tall and all legs and arms, but he's walking along with Mel, and the dialogue which I wrote was, remember lingerie, remember lingerie. That's not a joke. It's about a guy missing civilization. For Gyro Captain, civilization was women in lingerie. The chance of him ending up with a woman in lingerie did not appear great, given his role in the film.
It's not something that I become aware of, making every word count, but I was aware that they didn't have a lot of words, but yet that movie packed a good punch. Something else I was noticing about the film is that there's not a lot of weapons and ammo to go around. Max even has an unloaded shotgun for a long time. I started thinking about it because I was like, oh, well, Australia's not like America where it's pretty easy to get a gun. And I started looking into Australia's gun control laws, and there's quite a significant amount of hoops you have to jump through to get one legally. And I'm curious, was the gun control laws in the 80s about the same as they are today?
It's not just about the law. It's about a culture. Australia's a really tough country. The landscape, geographically, America's agriculturally incredibly rich. Australia's not. I mean, it's tough. There's a lot of danger out there. But we never adopted that culture that America does of suspicion of our government, of having outlaws run around all over the place, and cattle rustling and that. The only way you could ever survive in Australia, really, was through what we would call mateship. Everybody looking out for each other. It developed in this way that was very non-aggressive towards each other. And so weapons were never part of that culture. And then, of course, we had a terrible massacre in Tasmania, and that was that. The whole Australian public said enough's enough. And we, the government, with enormously widespread support, enacted extremely tough laws. And despite what many people in other places in the world might say, the government has not marched us all off to concentration camps or put us into slavery. Now, I'm not saying those things might not happen in other countries, not in Australia.
I live in America, and so I was thinking that Americans probably aren't keeping that in the back of their mind when they're watching Mad Max, and just the scarcity of weapons and ammo, and the fact that like a crossbow, like you could reuse the bolt if you can retrieve it, that kind of thing. There would probably be a scarcity no matter what, because people would probably use the guns a lot. But it would probably be that much harder to find any kind of firearm or ammo, once the shit hit the fan,
Well, that's right. Everything had gone to hell. And I'm sure that very few gun stores in Australia have been pillaged 30 years beforehand. People had shown a greater ingenuity. And of course, to a large extent, the weapons in the movie are the weapons of the cars, the vehicles of the weapon. I was in the office in Sydney. I don't live in Australia anymore, but many years ago, I was sitting in the office in Sydney, and my office happened to look out on the street in not a very good area of Sydney, I might say. And I'm sitting there looking out, and I sort of do a double take. Max's black on black Interceptor has just driven up the road and parked in front of the in front of our building. And I'm looking straight up. I'm thinking, wow. And then I get on the phone and I say to the person in the front, lock the doors. Everybody, red code alert, lunatic loose. Somebody had built an exact replica of the car. I wasn't going to take any risk. I wasn't going to chance my hand back, but they had a big effect. Look, I went to a drive-in when Road Warrior was playing. It's the only movie I've ever seen that got a standing ovation at the drive-in.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, this is great. People were out of their cars, hands raised above their heads, clapping and cheering, probably all drunk, but it didn't matter. It was pretty neat.
Well, I will say that if you could get Max's Ford here in America a lot easier, they would probably be everywhere.
Probably right.
When you go about writing a crazy action sequence for a movie like this, how do you go about writing to make sure it's safe enough, doable, and affordable?
You can't worry about whether it's affordable. You've got to let your imagination go. When you first start working movies, you tend to think the good scenes are ones that you've seen before. You think, oh, this is very much like that scene in Star Wars or Indiana Jones or whatever. That gives you some confidence, but it's a false friend, because what you're really looking for is things that nobody's seen before. Now, that's very hard, and you can't put an anchor around your imagination by saying, well, is this going to be affordable? Because you'll dismiss everything. You can't do the same with whether it's going to be safe. Your job is, as a producer, is to find people who will ensure that it's safe and listen to them when they say it can't possibly be done safely. Okay, throw it out, but let your imagination go and follow it where it leads. And George taught me a very interesting thing, which was that action sequences work basically to a comedic rhythm. And he says in movies, comedic moments work the very best if they work to a rhythm of 1, 2, 3. You tell the joke, then you top it. When you top it, they start to laugh much more. But then you've got to top the topper. And that's when you get that explosive thing in a movie house where everybody's starting to really laugh. Action sequences work to exactly the same rhythm. You do one stunt, one event that the audience says, whoa, that's pretty good. Now you top it. And they say, wow. And then you top the topper. So George taught me that. So we're always looking for things that, oh yeah, the bike hits the prime mover, the bike gets shattered, the bike rider goes under the prime mover, and then you cut to the back and the rear wheels run over his body. So you're going 1, 2, 3. But it's all got to happen really fast.
That sequence, I feel like I can think of one from the Road Warrior very specifically, because either on beat 2 or beat 3, it's towards the end with like the whole semi-truck sequence, and then the vehicle chasing the semi-truck with the prisoners on the front, and they rear end. Craziness is happening, but that just tops it off, and just completely blows your mind.
That's a perfect example of it. Absolutely. So, yeah, and of course, that George thinks in those terms. He thinks in visual. So I think in more word terms, So it was a good marriage at that stage.
Yeah. Did you ever go out on set when you were done writing and they're shooting?
Oh, I was there the whole time.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Yeah, we see it's Australia. Things are not, especially back then. I mean, it was all hands to the pumps. Anybody with a good idea got listened to because we were desperate for good ideas. Any ideas half the time. So, in America, when you work in Hollywood, everything is about silos, people being contained to silos, about power, about influence. In Australia, it's, well, we're making a movie and we haven't got any money, and maybe it's going to be a good movie, but at least it's better than a lot of other jobs, maybe. So everybody was on the case.
Did you ever get offered to write for the newest Mad Max movies?
No. No.
Is there any reason?
I don't think so. I mean, our careers have gone in very different paths.
Mm-hmm.
You know, George had decided to stay in Australia. I'd left Australia. I went and worked in Hollywood. I married an American woman. I had my children. I became a novelist. Making movies is a director's medium. There can only be one leader, only one creative vision, and that's the director. I've been offered to direct movies, and I think I could have done a pretty good job, but I don't think I could have ever done an outstanding job. It's not my skills. And I wanted to be the author of my own works.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to be the co-author of somebody else's work.
Right.
And, you know, that takes you many years to come to that maturity, to that sense of self. And you know, for a lot of people, they love writing movies, and that's great. But the unfortunate truth is that most movies have many writers, and it's very hard in big commercial movies for you to be solely responsible for writing the script. So it was an easy solution. I decided to be a novelist.
So transitioning over into the Year of the Locust in this little bridge between Mad Max in The Road Warrior, when Max has the gyro pilot in the back and the shotgun's there with the dog bone and it's tied to the trigger of the shotgun, that kind of creativity that I saw there, I was like, oh yeah, I just read that kind of creativity in the Year of the Locust between, you know, the way he goes about unpoisoning the water, and then the pressure plate in the trash can, those kinds of things. When I'm reading those things, I'm just like, wow, I would have never thought of that. And I don't know if this is like some common secret agent spy stuff that everyone knows, but I just had never heard that stuff before.
That's terrific. That's an enormous compliment, because you don't want to do stuff. People have seen it or read it all before and are 5 miles in front of you. Pressure plate thing in the bottom of the waste paper basket is great because you set the paper on fire. Mm-hmm. Natural instinct is, especially if you're a spy, that must be valuable material. I will stamp out the flames, blow myself to pieces. Of course, our hero realizes what the trick is. He doesn't do it. So, you know, you're looking all the time to find something to energize the paragraph, to energize the page, the chapter, always looking. And, you know, and that's not just stunts or pyrotechnical gags or anything like that. It's about information. It's about telling people that Baku is the capital of Azerbaijan and was once the wealthiest city in the world. The Rothschilds were there, the Rockefellers, everybody, and they built these extraordinary mansions. They didn't build a hospital or a university or anything like that. What did they build? They built an exact replica of the Baroque casino in Monte Carlo. That was their idea. This is the people we're dealing with. A lot of people say, well, where the hell is Baku? Except, well, that's what you want them to say. It's very draining to do it. It's very... it takes a lot of energy researching.
Yeah.
If you can pull it off, you've engaged the reader and they'll go with you to some pretty extraordinary places. And I don't mean just geographically. I mean emotionally and, you know.
How much research do you have to do about this? Because, like, for one, I don't know. Have you ever lived in America?
Oh, yeah. I've lived many times and for quite long periods of time, yes.
At this point in my life, I would have zero confidence in writing about an Australian or a British kind of government agency without doing years of research. And, you know, it's heavily, you know, CIA based. If you research these things, does the CIA actually bury an empty coffin or sometimes put a different dead body than who they said it belongs to?
I don't know.
It sounds good.
If they do it, they're not going to tell us, are they? That's the CIA. That's a great thing about writing about the CIA.
You could say whatever.
If they come out and deny it, everybody says, oh, well, Terry got that right.
Yeah.
Denying it because, he hit a bullseye there.
Yeah.
If they don't say anything, then everybody thinks, oh, he got that part right, because otherwise, they're just letting that slip by. They're just maintaining this, sphinx-like silence.
Right.
So in a way, you can't lose. Why did I put that in? Because he's a denied access area spy, the very spear point of the intelligence community. The most dangerous missions are reserved for people like himself. They don't go in to recover bodies. They're not calling up the Iranian government and say, oh, I'm very sorry, but one of our spies just came to a very
Yeah.
unpleasant and untimely end. Do you mind if we come in and recover his body? And the Iranian government says, oh, yeah, sure. No, of
Yeah.
course not. It's denied. Oh, no, he's not American. No, he's probably Canadian. Oh, he's just a fantasist. Some guy saying that he works for the CIA. We know nothing about him. Well, if he does die, they've got to explain it. He's got family. He's got college roommates. What happened to him? Oh, well, he was a CIA agent, and he died in the service of his country. We can't say anymore because it's still an active mission, but the ceremony will be held at Arlington or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So what are they going to do? An empty coffin? Or probably. They're not going to say, well, we left him on the battlefield. No, he's still out there. The crows are feasting on him and what have you, because I don't think that would be strong for recruiting. Do I know if they do it? No. Would I be surprised? Not at all. If I was running the CIA, that's the sort of thing that I might come up with.
I want to ask you about this before I forget. This book was in development for years, from what I read. And then during the pandemic, you were finishing or rewriting this book under some unique and interesting circumstances. Can you elaborate on those?
Yeah, difficult circumstances. I'd gone to England from our home in Australia to look for a house for us to rent, because I've got 4 kids. The boys were very good cricketers, and they wanted to have that experience of playing cricket in England. So I'm a writer. I can work anywhere. And I'd lived in England before. So I went to find a house to rent. And then when COVID started to get really bad, or started to become serious, it gave me great pause. And the family was supposed to come over and join me. So I called my wife and I said, hey, listen, I think this might turn out to be really something. I said, don't come, just wait. So she did. And she called me and she said, some month or two later, and she said, listen, I've got to put the dogs on the plane tomorrow because they take longer to get to England than the humans. They cost far more too. I mean, it was $4,000 per dog.
Holy crap.
I know. My daughter had sent her horses, $25,000 a horse.
Jesus.
Anyway, I said to Kristen, do not put the dogs on the plane. I think this is going to get really serious. Well, it did. Australia, a few weeks later, closed all its borders. They couldn't leave and I couldn't return. I had decided I was not going to go through an English winter. I'd come to Portugal, where the weather's better, cost of living's good. Interesting place. I'd never been here before in my life. So I flew over and got an apartment. Said to Kristen, well, everybody can come to Portugal and join me as soon as they lift the restrictions. 2.5 years later, they lifted the restrictions. I didn't see the family.
That's crazy.
Not my kids, not the dogs. It was pretty difficult. I mean, I did not speak a word of Portuguese. I did not know anybody here. I had no knowledge of Portugal or Lisbon. I had a very nice apartment. Kristen had done a sterling job and managed, we had a house in New Zealand, and she had managed virtually by remote control to get a lot of furniture loaded up from the house in New Zealand, because we weren't living there, we were living in Australia, and get it sent, because I was sleeping on an air mattress on the floor and I had a desk from IKEA. She sent the furniture. The boat with our container of furniture on it caught fire off of Singapore in the Malacca Straits. How many modern freighters catch fire? They drop the container overboard, but this never happens. Well, it happened to us. So I went through months of not knowing whether our container had survived. It did. But now COVID was getting way worse, and it had to be moved off of one ship, which had been towed up into Kuala Lumpur, into Malaysia, and put on board another boat that then had to make its way to Europe. So I spent months sleeping on an air mattress on the floor, and my advice is don't.
Yeah.
I don't know what happens. They lose air, and you end up sleeping half on the floor. And it was difficult. I mean, emotionally, it was very, very difficult. And, Portugal itself went into a very serious lockdown, nothing like Australia's. But, I paid a price for that emotionally. But I supported the Australian government enormously. I think they saved a lot of lives. They really did. And our lives were some of them. Or may have been some of them. I don't know. But, it was, I got the thin end of the wedge. But, so what? Lots of people died.
Wow.
So I'm just grateful that we made it through.
So you spent that time finishing the book because you have like a ton of time to do it now, or
no,
were you motivated?
Yeah, I'd like to say yes, but it's very hard to write when you're in a very downcast state. You've got to find a sort of an emotional equilibrium. It's very hard. You can kid yourself. I sat in front of the computer for a long time, but you've got to find the joy in doing something, even if it's grim scenes or chapters you're writing. You've got to find some joy in it. There wasn't much joy in my life. I didn't want to be in Portugal. I wanted to be with the family. I missed, the touch of another human being. You don't realize how important those things are. That just, right. My kids are teenagers and that, but even so, they come up, put their arm around and say, "You okay, Dad?" Or "You look tired," or whatever. Oh, that's nothing. So yeah, it was difficult. But anyway, I got it done.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had to go through that. That's really
thank
rough.
you. But it was difficult.
I know you like having basically that this is your title work that you wrote, but is the thrill of writing a book the same or better, worse than writing a movie? Because like a movie, you can see it come to like a visual place too, like beyond just inside your head, or maybe just, being that one man band that you were talking about is like the best feeling.
I mean, I grew up reading, as I mentioned, and I had unstinting admiration for authors of good books. And a lot of books really survive for a very long time.
Right.
They really do. Now, if we go back to, the early 1900s, Rudolph Valentino was the biggest movie star in the world, unequaled. I don't know. Has anybody seen any Rudolph Valentino movies lately? No. Movies are much more of their immediate culture. Books have a much longer shelf life. So to me, authors are in the pantheon. They really are. Now, I'm not saying I deserve to be no, not for a moment. But it gives me an enormous amount of pleasure to say, I'm sitting down doing what people who I have unstinting admiration for did. I'm incredibly proud of the movies that I made. I wouldn't have written novels had I not had the success of some movies. I probably would have given up writing and got a real job, as my mother would say.
Yeah, that's really good insight. I don't think I've ever quite thought about it that way, about movies just really targeting the culture now. And I think a part of that too is probably a little bit of just the technology, but then also, like who's popular right now. But I last summer read The War of the Worlds, which is from like the 1800s, and it holds up perfect today. Like I absolutely loved reading that book.
Absolutely. I don't know if you've seen the original Jurassic Park recently, but I remember when that came out, everybody was sitting there, jaws dropping, looking at these dinosaurs. You see them now and you think, oh my God, those, what are those? What are them? Because the visual effects technology has moved so far, so fast that you're looking at something that is, I'm not saying black and white, but, I mean, it seems of its period.
Yeah.
Whereas Michael Crichton's book, I haven't read that for many years, but I'm sure you could read it now and say, wow, gee, somebody should make this as a movie. It wouldn't appear dated. One of my favorite books, in very commercial literature, is The Shining by Stephen King. I think it's a brilliant book, incredibly engaging. Now, I saw the movie, of course. I've seen the movie a number of times. But the movie feels dated because we all know Jack Nicholson. Mm-hmm. We know he was quite a young man when he was doing that. We now know that he's a very elderly man. So you immediately, my kids say, who's playing that? I say, oh, that's Jack Nicholson. Oh, was he a movie star, Dad? I say, yeah, it was. But because books rely much more on your imagination, they are not quite as easily dated.
So now that this book is about to come out, it comes out February 6th, right? The Year of the Locust?
Yeah.
Do you already have your next work coming down the pike or undecided?
Well, I was very tired during Locust. It was a long, long haul. The published work is about 270,000 words. Down the bottom of my Word document, it tells me I wrote 1,070,000. I discarded 800,000 words.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
You get very despondent when you're 500 pages in and you still can't see the end. And the publishers called me, as usual, saying, well, how much longer do you think? I was like, I don't know, maybe 6 months, I don't know. And they said, if you chose to do Pilgrim 2, there's a huge demand for it out there. And I think that it could be a very successful project, not just business-wise, but creatively, because the characters are very interesting. Moment of weakness, probably just to get them off the phone. I said, yeah, all right. Pilgrim 2's next.
That makes me really happy to hear because after reading The Year of the Locust, I now have Pilgrim on my reading list. It's probably going to be the next book after I'm done with the one that I'm reading currently. And to hear that there's going to be a second one just makes me even more excited because it's got to be good.
Thank you. Yeah. Look, it's a good book. I don't know if it's a great book. I don't know but yeah, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of both of the books. And so what more can I ask for? That's a joy in itself.
Well, you did a really great job on it. I hope the release goes super well and that the people listening have enjoyed hearing you talk about Mad Max as much as I have, and also your book, The Year of the Locust, and they should definitely get it. I chose the audiobook version because I just have a horrible attention span, but it did not feel like a 29-hour long book.
Oh, God. I didn't realize it was that long.
Yeah, when I saw that, I was like, oh, my God.
Oh, congratulations for finishing.
Yeah, well, that was the kicker. This got scheduled maybe 3 weeks ago. I was like, can I listen to 30 hours of a book in this amount of time? Well, anyways, thank you for coming on here. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me about your projects, and hopefully you'll be back on when Pilgrim 2 comes out.
You bet. I'd love to come. Thank you so much for hosting the show and making it such an interesting conversation. I really appreciate it.